All right, we're live. Hello, all you lean lunchers out there. This is Aaron Eaton from Moves the Needle. We have a special edition today with our esteemed branding panel, uh, Jeremiah, Brant, and Roslyn, and they'll get a chance to introduce themselves in just a moment here. Wanted to thank all of you for joining us today and let you know that you can submit questions either through Twitter, through the comments on Google+, or any other means that you can find to get a hold of me. Feel free to. Trying to keep tabs on those. Any questions that you guys have as we move along through this panel should help make sure that you guys are getting the most out of this. So. Without further ado, I'm gonna allow everybody to quickly introduce themselves, and we'll tee up kind of at a high level what we will be discussing today. So I will call on Mr. Cooper first, since he's to the left on my screen.
All right, so I'm the non-branding expert on the branding expert panel. I New York Times bestseller, a lean entrepreneur. Really got into that based upon trying to bring more return on investment type of thinking to the marketing side of the house back in the early mid 2000s, and so I'm happy to try to bring some of that to the branding side of the house too. And so I hope that's actually part of the discussion today, and excited that we've got Roz and Jeremiah on board to help us traverse some of that.
Awesome. All right, so we'll jump over to Jeremiah.
My name is Jeremiah Gardner. I'm the author of The Lean Brand, and I've kind of been in and outside of brand for a long time. Owned agencies, worked from the design side, but really approached the Lean Brand kind of feeling like something wasn't working anymore. And really comes back down to how does branding deliver value, and how do those relationships kind of build over time was the questions that we were kind of asking with the book. And so, yeah, I'm happy to be here. Thanks for having me, and I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Awesome. Thanks for joining us. And last but certainly not least, we will jump over to Roz.
Okay, so I'm Chief Brand Builder at Innoventure Consulting Group, and we specialize in helping companies build brand experiences and equity. We take teams through a series of audit and cultural exploration and brand personality development, and then we help infuse that deeply into the DNA of every team member, so they're building great customer experiences and having interactions that align to their brand and personality. I've been doing branding and marketing for 20 years, and both on the agency and the client side of the business. Innoventure works with well-funded startups to Fortune 500 companies, and currently we're taking the San Diego Direct Marketing Association through a new branding program that we're going to be launching in January at our annual Surge event in San Diego.
Awesome. That sounds exciting. Yeah, so from lean startup and moves the needle perspective, really, we felt like we're seeing a lot of different perspectives on really how brand fits in. I think a lot of people define it different ways and think about it differently. From the point where you're starting out and you're just trying to figure out how to build a brand, all the way through to the point where you're trying to manage one that's existing while you're launching new products and innovating, and like how do you balance all those kinds of things together. And so we felt to be really valuable to get a diverse set of perspectives. All of you have lots and lots of different experiences in these areas, and so thought it'd be extremely valuable for folks in the enterprise that are, launching new products and innovating and trying to balance all of these things. There's one of the key things that people run into when trying to launch new products and run lean experiments is the enhancement or the marring of their existing brand through those experiments. Something that comes up constantly with all of our students and the folks that we try to help out. So I want to start with something really basic, just to get us all on the same sheet of music, which is, can you guys talk just a little bit about what brand actually means to you? Like, how do you define that? Do you see it the same, or do you guys see it differently?
Sure.
I knew that was going to happen.
Yeah, which one goes first? I'll jump in. I'll start. I think there's a lot of definitions of brand that exist out there, and it seems a new one gets floated out into kind of the business lexicon every few months, and which leads to a lot of confusion. And so I think any constructive discussion about brand has to start with definitions. Otherwise, you're kind of talking at cross purposes. And I think to kind of add to the noise, oftentimes it gets used as a synonym for business, or it gets used for as a noun in terms of a brand is X, or it even gets used as a verb that we just need to brand ourselves. And so there's all kinds of ways that the word gets used, and I think when you dig at the heart of what it really truly means to have a brand, and all the definitions that are tried to kind of be floated out there, where I kind of think about it is I think that brand is the relationship between an organization and an audience, and that relationship is powerful, because that's how we as human beings relate to people, we relate to products, we relate to organizations. And so the way that I kind of think about it is that brand is the relationship. It's not, we don't have relationships with brands. No, brand is the relationship itself. And so that's kind of really helped to clear up some of those things where branding becomes relationship building, and there's both intentional side of that and unintentional sides of that. So that's how I kind of think about it, and that's how I approach the work of talking about brand development.
I'd like to pile on to what Jeremiah just said. I absolutely agree with everything he said, and what I would add to that is that brand really is the sum of all the experiences that a consumer has with the product or the company or whatever it is that's being sold. It's the sum of all the experiences they've had, either experiences that build up the brand or tear down the brand unintentionally. That's why it's really important to get it right. So a lot of companies that I work with, when I start out, they think, well, we have a logo, or they think the brand is the logo, or the brand is just the look and feel, and it's so not that. Those are all supporting factors. You've got to get the brand right, and you've got to know what is important to your customers before you even begin to think about your brand. Because if it doesn't make that emotional connection, you're going down the wrong road right from the start.
So I personally, I love those explanations. Working with startups, I'm often frustrated by the fact that the first $25,000 that a startup entrepreneur is able to scrape together, they often start thinking about their logo and their website and their color palette and what they're going to put on their pens, and certainly the internet itself has no shortage of how do you name your company, and to me all of that stuff is kind of BS. All of the startups that we know and love started out as something different than they ended up. And if they had spent their first thousands of dollars worried about all of that, maybe they never would have grown up into what we know and love. And so I think it's one of those things that marketers often think engineering is this black box, and they don't have to understand any of the technology, and yet vice versa is also true. Founders and non-marketing people often look at the marketing side of the house as this black box, and they don't need to look inside there, and they don't understand it. And really, we just need more transparency about what all this means and how founders get it going. And if large brands are going to rebrand themselves, how do they need to look at things a little bit differently? And then how does the innovation side of the house look at branding differently inside of these large enterprises? All of these are open issues, and the landscape that we're operating in is moving so quickly now that I think we need a new way of looking about how we build those relationships. And I guess my last comment would be is that you cannot not do branding. You're doing branding regardless of whether you're doing it purposefully or not. And so you're establishing relationships with your customers, you're behaving in a particular way, and those behaviors are creating your brand. So it's really important, as Rod says, to get it up front, that say, put this on the table, our brand is being developed. How are we going to now purposely do branding that reflects the relationships that we want to have with our audience, and that we want our audience to have with us?
So is that I know that that Jeremiah talked a little bit about lean brand and the new book and those things. Is that different from the things that you guys just described around the definition of brand, or did we just describe the conventional brand and you're going to describe something new in this book, or how does that play in?
Yeah, I think we could spend the rest of the hour just talking about conventional versus lean, but I think in the conventional model, the biggest thing is that it assumes that you can predict the relationship you'll have or that you do have, and so it uses kind of this process, and it's this process that's full of things like your brand promise, your value statement, your vision statement, your brand architecture. In fact, there's a great thing that came out this last Christmas about Santa's brand architecture that kind of made the rounds around the internet, just kind of poking fun at this idea. And it's this big process that gets put together, and it's very linear. And the idea is that if you add all of these components together, if you know your vision statement and you have your logo and you know your brand architecture and you can define your brand personality, that the end of the equation equals a brand, and now you just need to go out and broadcast it everywhere. And I think that approach is just outdated, and I think that approach is not creating value for organizations today, and especially not from a startup perspective. And so Lean Brand really looks at the idea of how do we break down the relationship to the things that truly matter, and how do we focus instead of delivering something or broadcasting something, in learning what works and what doesn't work, in the purpose of building the relationship that we want and that our customers want with us. Because the inherent part of defining brand as a relationship is that no one owns it. It only takes on meaning with your audience, and your audience includes not only your customers, but the vendors that interact with you, the C-level team, any new employees that come on board, people that love you and people that hate you are all part of that audience. And so Lean tries to eliminate the waste in the development of that relationship and to discover the value that's being created in the relationship through an iterative process, through testing, through actually going out with your customers and learning about what's working and what doesn't work, rather than trying to predict from the 35th floor boardroom of your brand genius ivory tower what's going to happen when you get outside into the market.
That sounds real interesting, Jeremiah. And it makes a great deal of sense. It sounds like you're organically building experience into the entire end-to-end spectrum of the customer experience. So you're building the type of brand and the experience you want the customer to have right in as you're building the product or you're building whatever it is that you're doing, which is perfect. Because I'm so happy to hear you say this. Most companies take a look at certain snippets in time. They'll take snapshots, like they might listen in on customer service calls or sales calls, or they might look at chat transcripts and tell their people why it either does or doesn't align to their brand. And if you do it the way Jeremiah just described it, then look what you're building right from the start. You don't have to go back and audit it in such a way, because now you've already built it organically. You've created a company and a brand that it's in the DNA of everybody that's touching customers. So much easier down the road, and so much less expensive.
Right, so this is the reason why I got excited about working with Jeremiah, because from the Lean Entrepreneur, I developed this framework which is describes 7 steps that a customer goes through in their relationship with a company, from first becoming aware of the product to being passionate about the whole company. And so what we did in the Lean brand is add this emotional impact layer to each of these 7 so that you are testing aspects of your purposeful branding, as you're building out those components, from becoming a startup founder with this brilliant idea to actually developing a scalable business. And so you don't want those entities operating separately. You can actually integrate the testing of your brand components, as well as the value that you're bringing in whatever product or service that you're offering.
Yeah, and that's a really important thing to kind of get up front. What Brant just said too is that a lot of people in my industry want to talk about brand is the business, that brand is the most important thing, just like product engineers want to talk about features or the back end is the most important thing. The reality is, or the way that I think about it, is that an organization really is its products, really is the relationships that they build with their customers and their audience, or their full audience, so their employees and so on and so forth, and the culture, how they relate to themselves. And so all of these things are interconnected. And if you ask the product guys why the iPhone was successful, they'll tell you, the infrastructure of the phone. You ask the UX guys, they'll say because it was so intuitive to use. You ask the brand people, they'll tell you because the brand's so great. You ask the culture people, it's because they all work in little black boxes and no one knows what else is going on within Apple, right? And they're all right and they're all wrong at the same time, because the customer doesn't experience it from different silos of the organization. They experience it as one value proposition, one delivery of value. So brand is not the business. Brand is always in service to the organization that you want to build, just like products and just like culture. And so it's important to make that distinction that everything is interconnected, and that the purpose of zooming in on one aspect is to understand the value creation potential, or what value it's actually creating in the market. And the next step is zooming back out to understand how that impacts the rest of the organization. And so different people with different skills, different ways of approaching it, but you have to always keep in mind the customer and how they're going to experience it. And they're going to experience it united, not in silos.
Jeremiah, what I would like to add to that is that it sounds like all of those pieces are very important, so none of them can work alone. And yet I think company culture is so critical, because if that's not there, if the brand isn't authentic and in alignment with the culture, then you're going to have dissonance in customer experiences. So that is such a critical piece of it, is to making sure that your internal culture mirrors that external brand experience, or the personality of the brand itself, so that everybody who touches a customer or has any outside influence at all is mirroring the values and the integrity of the brand.
Sure, yeah. Actually, I have a funny story about that right now. I just experienced driving to my office this morning. So there's this new product that was all the rage called Coin, and it's one card that you can put all of your cards onto. And this is a great thing to your point, Roz, is that they basically said, we're so sorry, they're about a year behind schedule, it feels like. It was a Kickstarter campaign that's just run on and on and on and on. And they, came out with this big apology about how late they are, and offered, an upgrade and some things. And I said, oh, okay, this is kind of cool. And I tried to log into their app, and it says, oh, sorry, something happened, give us a call, and we'll take care of it. So I figured, okay, Wednesday morning, I'll give them a call. And on the way to work, I give them a call, and it's just an answering machine that tells me that they're not available. And I want to pull my hair out, because I go, like, you can't make this broad apology and this huge push that says our customers are the most important thing, and then tell me to call you on your app, and I call at normal business hours, and you give me a recording that tells me, oh, just email us now. And so there's a disjoint between those things, and I think it's so true. Someone should have picked up that phone. If someone had picked up that phone, I wouldn't be telling the story right now. But now I've had an experience that's negative, that comes back to the culture of what they prioritize, and comes back to what they try to project and tell us that, oh, our customers are the most important thing. And so granted, I'm sure there's a whole story behind why they didn't pick up the phone, all these things, but all I know is what I know. And so my relationship building with Coin is actually feeling very negative, where I was a huge, passionate proponent of it when it first came out. So it's so true how culture can impact the way that your audience reacts to you. Oh, and sorry, Coin, I didn't mean to pick on you.
I tell you, not to derail the conversation, but it's an interesting aspect with crowdfunding. really what are very, very early stage startups suddenly find themselves with problems of scale that they had no way of anticipating. And so we've heard these stories about startups that hundreds of thousands of customers virtually overnight, and yet they haven't figured out how to source their manufacturing, and they haven't figured out how to distribute internationally. And so they run into all of these product problems. And here's a great example of what are probably, very genuine people that had this neat idea and, woke up one day and had hundreds of thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of customers, and actually don't even have the infrastructure to deal with even the relationship that they may really want to be able to have with their customers. But it's just, sometimes scaling overnight is actually what kills your company, right? It's premature scaling. And this organization, they may have the right heart in the founders, but they're now stuck in this place that they're not even able to deliver on what their relationship is that they had established via the Kickstarter.
I think you see the same thing in the enterprise, just manifests itself slightly differently, right? Which is that you've got a new product that's in the process of being launched, and everybody that's on the project team is drawn towards trying to get it perfect so that they have all of that infrastructure to be able to support millions of customers all in place before they ever have one customer. And so I think you kind of end up with the opposite side of the same coin, right? Just manifests itself slightly differently, but it's the same. The premature scaling in both cases ends up creating a bad brand experience for the customers that interact with that product.
Yep.
Aaron, what's interesting, though, is for companies that have done a really good job of creating delightful experiences and have been consistent with their brand, that helps insulate them against minor missteps. Not the big ones, but the minor ones. Customers would be forgiving, right? I mean, you think of the company that's doing it, it's firing on all cylinders. I'm sure everybody would agree, is Zappos, right? A great brand, great culture, everything's in alignment. Were they to make a few mistakes, their customers would be very forgiving because of the amount of money or amount of value that they've invested in making sure that their brand is strong and that they really do care and are taking care of customers. People believe that Zappos cares about them and are going to deliver delight every time. So if they miss, okay, I'll forgive you. Everybody makes mistakes. So it's that strength of what they've already built.
Yep.
A little flexibility.
Roz,
Yeah.
I'm really sort of interested in what your perspective is on some of these on some of the larger brands you work with. I mean, what are sort of the bigger challenges that they're facing? Aaron and I work with some pretty large companies usually trying to help them move faster in the innovation space, and there's some problems inherent in that. But what's interesting to me is that they all feel like they have to move faster. That there's so much changing. There's startups, there's technological transformation, there's competition. The world is, as we become more digital, the world moves at the speed of the internet. And so I'm curious, from the brand perspective, what are you seeing as some of the challenges in the very large enterprises?
The challenges are staying in tune with being authentic with who you are and making sure that it resonates with customers, because as companies grow, they change and they evolve, just like people, right? Like we have personalities. I like to talk about the brand personality because it's something that everybody understands. We have personalities, we change and evolve over time. As companies grow, they could easily lose touch with what once made them so special and be completely unaware of it. They may start thinking that sales are slipping or their stock is slipping and not recognize that they've lost touch with who they are. And so the biggest challenge is to get them to stop, amidst all the rush and frantic, stop, breathe, assess who you are, assess who your customers are, what they expect from you. What have you built? Where are you going? What does this brand aspire to be? Dream a little, stretch. What do your customers look? What do your competition? What do they look like? What do you think is going to resonate? And then you really just have to take the time and energy to invest in understanding what that needs to be so that you can move forward and get into authentication, get into congruence once again. It takes a lot of courage to do that. And you've got to have the right mindset from the top. This isn't something that a marketing manager or product manager can initiate. This has to be at executive level. They have to be the one driving and believing. And it's not a push down. It's a top down, bottom up, and middle in type of a situation. You need to have everybody in the organization invested in this, or representation from each team to understand it, because they're the ones that will then become your evangelists and spread it outward throughout the entire organization.
Nice. I think that's it's followed the same pattern as maybe the products or the innovation teams has had to deal with for the last 5 or 6 years, where that isn't just the product team's responsibility anymore, and all of the lean innovation stuff that we do, it is exactly the same. It has to be this combination of the top down saying, hey, we are going to do things differently, as well as the grassroots people who tend to already get it, or they're doing something already. They just need the support of the senior management. So it's great to hear that the leading brands are viewing brands in that way, that it's not siloed, it's not just the responsibility, but it's really everyone's responsibility.
One of the most telling questions I ask when I go into a company is, I ask them, okay, who in the company owns the brand? And they usually say marketing.
Right.
And it's kind of sad, but no, everybody owns the brand. We all own the brand.
Yep.
And I think that's interesting too from just a startup perspective is when you're growing, like Ross says, you're going to evolve and change, and all of those things are true. But can you remain focused? Can you remain focused around what the passion that you've built in your early adopter audience, and how the question of scale becomes a question of focus, and becomes a question of from a relationship perspective of can you continue to look at who will be most passionate, and do you understand why they are? Because the larger and larger that gets, it can be potentially harder to do that. And so, in my opinion, the most direct way to do that is to go to your customer. Statistics and demographics and all these large market research and focus group can only provide the amount of information in terms of how you structure the questions. And they can only give you kind of a snapshot, as Roz used earlier, or a surface layer of information. And so do you have teams and people from every department within your organization that are actually touching the customer and actually understanding the relationship that they're developing? And if you don't, that's one way to start to get actual feedback from the people that matter most, which is your audience, in regard to how you continue to scale and grow the relationships that you're building, which is your brand.
Jeremiah, you just made such a great point about everybody being involved with the customer. I am such a strong believer that everybody in an organization should have customer conversations. They need to understand firsthand for themselves and not get this information filtered back to them from somebody else. That's how you really build customer experiences that are genuine and delighters for your entire organization.
There's a really good change management book that I really like. It's called Switch. And it talks about the two key components, right? You've got data on one side, but emotion on the other, and that you have to actually engage both parts of someone's brain to get them to take action, right? You have to give them some data that shows that they're headed in the right way to engage their logical brain, but then give them a story or give them someone to emotionally connect with to engage the emotional side of their brain and get them moving forward. Sounds like that's really what you guys are talking about, that you get some of that data from the research studies and from the surveys and that kind of stuff, but you need to also combine that with actual in-person interactions with the customers to get that emotional connection with them. Is that true?
Yeah, totally. I mean, and you can break it down even simpler than that. I mean, if you think about I like to think about two ideas here. Is that one, if for most of us, in America, you can think about it as the DVR effect, right? And if you ask most people directly, what do you DVR on a regular basis? And they'll tell you, the Rachel Maddow show, maybe the Colbert Report, and so on and so forth. And then when you go home and you actually pull up their DVR, you've got the Kardashians and you've got Duck Dynasty as well. And it's not that they were lying to you; it's that they really don't remember that that's what they did. And so the behavior has to match. And it's the same thing that Malcolm Gladwell talks about coffee. And I think it's a great example. Is if you ask people, what kind of coffee do you want, they're going to tell you, bold, rich, strong, hearty roast of coffee. And what's the next thing they do? They get their coffee and they walk over and I do it, cream and sugar, right? Because I really like milky, sweet sugary coffee, right? And so you have to be able to match the behavior and the reasons why people behave in that way with the direct data that you may be able to collect from a quantitative standpoint. And so both of them have to be able to connect together, otherwise you're making decisions based on either false information or on false learnings. And so what's the way that you bridge those gaps? You have to be willing to experiment, you have to be willing to test, and you have to be willing to put a stake in the ground. I think Moves the Needle does a great job of talking about this, is if you don't say this is what success is and this is what failure is, and we'll know success when we see this, and we'll know we need to go back and iterate and test again when we see this. If you're not willing to make that stand in the ground, then you're simply trying to gather information that's really tough to make decisions upon, especially at scale in an enterprise. At a startup, you're risking. Oh, go ahead.
The way Eric Ries puts it, right, is if you run an experiment and the expecting result is that something will happen, you'll be right 100% of the time because something always happens.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah, so I think that the other thing I was going to add there is that it's not only the way we look at it inside the framework is that your product delivers this utility and this satisfaction, and so that's actually brand promise is one of those nice marketing buzzwords out there, and I personally I don't like that term, but the promise really should be around what the product can deliver. And then what the company delivers is more aspirational. And so that's actually the impact that you have because you're solving a real problem. And so it's sort of this greater aspiration that you share with your customer about the impact that solving these problems with the product. Satisfaction level, and then in order to achieve passion, which is really where you'll see word of mouth marketing grow and you'll see this organic growth, is when you achieve this emotional impact.
And that, Brent and guys, that's where I'd like to jump in with how brand personality plays such a huge role, because a lot of companies that are the same or very similar in product attributes need to have a brand personality to help differentiate them and help make that emotional connection. When you think about different brands, when you think about some of the iconic brands, the strong ones, you've got companies like Apple or Zappos, they've done a very good job of creating a brand personality that resonates with their customers. And even if their customers, like for Apple, younger, independent thinking, think different, they're anti-corporate. Even if I, as a customer, am not that personality, it's something I aspire to be. So it's really important that brands create personalities that resonate with their customers and deepen that emotional connection, so that empathy is always underlying everything that they do, making sure they understand what's important to customers and building those experiences around that.
Yep. The way we sort of talk about it is in also sort of this framework that comes from the lean entrepreneur, which is the innovation spectrum. And so if you're more on the sustaining side, the incremental, where you're operating in existing markets, and again, sustaining is not a pejorative, it's where the larger market is, it's where the margins are, it's where all big successful businesses tend to be, is over on the sustaining side. Your brand personality, the aspiration is going to be more important. You might be producing a commodity and there really is no difference between you and your competition, and so brand is going to be the only thing that's different. Or even if it's not a commodity, it's a very competitive market. really the iPhone market and all of Apple's products are inside a very competitive market, and so the what differentiates you. Whereas if you're more on the disruptive side, if you're then really the product's going to lead the way there, and brand is less important in the early stages, because if you really can't solve a problem, then nobody cares about what your brand personality is yet. Right. And so as you evolve as a company, you want to go to the sustaining side. As you evolve as a company, your brand is going to become more and more important. And just what you don't want to do from a startup perspective is invest a lot of time and money and resources in developing all of these branding elements without you knowing what that relationship is. And the way you figure out that relationship is using these lean brand techniques that Jeremiah talked about, that evolve as you move towards the sustaining side.
Right, because I think I want to kind of add in here too about the whole personality idea, is that I think it's kind of a myth to think that you can simply define your personality and then that's what it is. And so I think it's really important that, you know, you can scream till you're blue in the face that, you know, you are fun and edgy, and if your audience doesn't see you that way and doesn't respond to you that way and really sees you as safe and sound, well, what's the truth in that? And so it's the same thing when you relate back to, this is why defining brand as relationship is so helpful in some ways, is because if you relate back to any relationship at that point, there's differences that exist. And so there's a personality of a relationship that I have with Aaron, and there's a personality of a relationship that I have with Brant, and there's a personality, you know, Roslyn just met you, but maybe, you know, there'll be a personality that develops out of our relationship. And so I think it's kind of, you know, you walk a fine line of trying to broadcast out what you think you are without really inviting customer participation into that journey. And so, and especially from a startup perspective, you could say all kinds of things about you. You just don't know what's true and how your audience will relate. And so I think about, you know, a company like McDonald's, who is just tone deaf on social media, and every post that they ever put out, they just get beat up, and it just seems that they're completely tone deaf to anything that happens out there. And the personality of the relationship between their audience on, you know, social media and McDonald's is abusive, you know, in one way. And so would McDonald's stand and say, we have an abusive relationship, we have an abusive personality, a tone deaf person? No, right? Or you think about the relationship between a company like Oreos or a product like Oreos and what they've been able to do with responding to their audience and understanding their audience and things. And that's a completely different relationship and a completely different personality. And so personality is never something, it's kind of this word that we like to use in the brand world, but the personality is not something I own. It's something, again, that's shared, and it's the personality of the relationship that exists between the organization and the audience. And there's ways to truly understand how that develops. And most importantly, if the personality does not create value, then it's pointless. And it doesn't do anything to build the relationship. And so it's tricky to make sure that when we use that language that we are very clear about what it means and very clear about how it develops value. Otherwise, it's very simple to spin off into kind of jargony world without it actually creating value for the organization or the audience.
Jeremiah, you are absolutely right, and there's nothing that sets my teeth on edge more than when I hear a branding expert come in and say, okay, now we're going to do your personality. If you were a dog, what kind of dog would you be? I was like, oh, please, please, this is so not what it's all about, people.
Right.
It really takes a great deal of introspection about who you are and you know, being authentic. I use that word a lot, but being genuine and authentic to the values that your brand truly does embody, and you'd better embody them and be actually living up to those experiences in the marketplace and not be tone deaf like McDonald's, right? So you need to be internal, you need to look externally, you need to understand your customers and what's important to them and how your values resonate with them. You've got to make sure you're making that emotional connection. Only then can you look at your personality and use that to inform the way you behave. And your behavior had better mirror that personality, or else, again, you're like McDonald's and you're just absolutely tone deaf. Oreos had it spot on. They were responsive, they were fun, they were doing exactly what you would expect Oreos to do. So it's a stark contrast, right, between two companies who think they understand brand, where one really does and one just doesn't get it at all.
And they're both bad for you, so there you go.
Oh, come on.
You're knocking them out of the park with the with the jabs there today, Jeremiah. So hey, let's we've got about 15 minutes left. I think we've thoroughly dug into what does all this mean and why is it important, and really how should startups as well as enterprises look at their brand. Let's get into some of the hows and some of the complexities a little bit for the last few minutes. So I think the first thing, we actually got a question here from one of our viewers, and they're talking about the differences in different customer segments. That, you know, if in an enterprise you've got multiple products with multiple customer segments, and it sounds like, you know, what you guys are saying is you really need to understand these customers at an emotional level and see what's making them tick. And how that aligns to what you're doing as a company. Sounds like that's like to come up with one high level. Hey, here's what our brand actually means based on the aggregation of all of that. Seems like it's a pretty complex undertaking. How do you go about actually approaching that in that situation?
Well, that's a really great question, and frankly, I'm not sure what the answer is. So I should probably leave it to the brand experts. But what size company are we talking about here? I mean, if it's a startup, I think you owe it to yourself. You have to establish these relationships really on a very small level, market segment by market segment. I think that what happens is as you grow and you move towards that sustaining side, your brand also becomes larger and starts to include in larger images and larger messages. It becomes inclusive of all these market segments, and the brand actually starts preceding you, right? So people start hearing you because of your reputation and because of the experience that you provide and because of these branding things. And so it's almost like product market fit, that this larger market starts pulling the brand out on this larger level. It's also interesting to note that most large organizations have different ways of reaching out to different market segments. I encourage people all the time to watch Geico commercials. We tend to only grasp towards the ones that reach us, right? The ones that we kind of like the gecko. But Geico actually has 4 or 5 completely different marketing campaigns running simultaneously that are reaching out to completely different market segments. And so while we maybe only experience one Geico, there's actually several out there that are operating. But I'd love to hear the others' take on sort of this larger brand message for multiple market segments.
Brant, we work with our clients, in the larger ones particularly, and encourage them and help them to develop customer personas. So typically, if you have different segments that you're offering services or products to, you want to have a customer persona for each one of them, so that you understand these customers at a very granular level. So the persona would include demographic information, psychographic information, of course, you know, some personal traits about who they are. You really want to get inside their head and understand this, and possibly have this information posted clearly within the company, so everybody understands and can see these personas every day, and develop customer experiences and products around these personas. So that way you're truly getting inside the head of your customer. And then this comes with a great deal of research. This isn't somebody sitting around a conference room saying, okay, let's just make them up, right? You really have to understand who your customers are, and create the personas that are true and representative of your customer base. And that's how you get at that, the branding that's going to resonate with your customers. You're not creating different brands for each persona, but you're understanding what your personas are and what the values are in common that you have to explore and to communicate out and to fulfill. And I'm glad you brought up Geico. I think they have an awful lot of money to spend is what they have.
Yeah, exactly right. It's also the big mistake that younger companies make, is that they'll look at these iconic brands and go, well, we should be doing it like them. And I'm all like, well, once you have billions of dollars in the bank, then yeah, maybe you can go take that on.
Yeah. Well, I'll kind of add in on this is that that's a really big question. And there is no answer to that question. And I think because, if you, again, come back to relationship, how do you define your relationship with your mother or your spouse, or your best friend or someone, your enemy? It's very difficult. And so I think, knowing your customer and using personas, I like to think about personas as don't base them on real people as much as you possibly can. Like if you can't sit in a room and identify who those customer segments are, then I'm not saying sit in your boardroom. I'm saying sit in a packed room and say that's a piece of a persona that we would talk to, and that's a piece too. But I think the other side of it is that when you think about the aggregate of all these things that go into building the relationship, it's very hard when you start thinking about measurement in that way. And so how do you measure someone's passion is really the core of the question, right? And although when you say, okay, are you passionate or are you not, right, we get back to the coffee example. Yes, I am. No, I'm not. And so I think there's a lot of ways that you can create proxies in order to get at the heart of that question from a lot of different angles. And so I think the reality is that the relationship develops based on the learning, the validated learning that you're able to generate. And so the only way to generate validated learning is to test, and the only way to test is to be out in front of your customers. And so there are multiple ways to measure emotional value to give you a snapshot of the passion of your customers, to give you a snapshot of how they relate to you. And I think that this is an ongoing, continuous, 24/7, everyday experience. And there's not a one-time thing that you can do to say, this is our brand now. There's iterations, and will continually develop. But I think getting at the DNA of an organization is to say, even from a startup perspective, is to say if you're not planning that ability to test and to validate your assumptions and to get out in front of your customers and truly experiment at the core DNA of who you are as an organization, then it's very easy to either get the wrong results, to do the wrong things, to rely on the wrong things, or to completely lose connection with your audience. And so brand is not the most important thing. You think about Kodak. Kodak had brand nirvana with the phrase Kodak moment, but they failed because they didn't evolve the product. Same thing with Pan Am Airlines. And so you can build the greatest brand in the world and not focus on the other pieces and still fail. And so that's why I say everything's interconnected, and at the core of who you are as an organization has to be that connection to your audience. It has to be continuous iteration, continuous evolution, and testing to learn about what's working and what doesn't. Because people change, you change as an organization as you grow, and the market will change over time.
That sounds like Jeremiah's summary.
There it is.
You're out.
Right, I'm gonna drop something, right? I'm done.
That's funny. My next question was going to be it was for those in an enterprise type situation, whether they're working on their existing brand or working on launching a new product that maybe is under a new brand or supports their existing brand. What tips would you give them? And you actually sort of already answered that question. Would your answer change at all when I add that extra focus of the enterprise side of it?
Yeah, I think you just don't know yet. I don't think you can predict. And so if you're early in development of a new product, I don't think you're making decisions about whether or not it's a a parent brand or a family of brands or all those things. I just don't think you can predict those things. And so I think when you're adding new products, you can apply lean brand techniques directly to the development of those. As you're running multiple MVPs, minimum viable products, you could be running multiple iterations of minimum viable brands. And I think you'll find that fit, and that decision becomes clear down the line. And so I think it goes back to your discussion about how the enterprise on the flip side of the coin are building a bunch of infrastructure and all these things that may not be necessary. It's the same thing on the brand side, is that those decisions about new products and line extensions and so on and so forth aren't necessarily needed. You don't need to make those up front. And I think they become clear through learning about the value that the product delivers and the relationship that gets developed around that product, and then you can make that decision down the line. And maybe it's a spin-off, maybe it's a line extension, maybe it's folded into the larger relationship with the organization, maybe it's a standalone that you are acquiring. All of those things are possible.
This follows the same paradigm as the products, right? So it took us a while to learn that products, if you're doing stuff that's truly innovative, the products need to be sort of separated out from the core business until the business model is proven. And I think that we just have to do the same thing with the branding of those new, more innovative products. Put somebody that can do that sort of thing on your innovation team so that they're part of the equation from the get-go. Allow them to test and experiment on building the brand just like a lean startup would, separate from the core business until the business model is proven, until scaling is proven, and then I think the company needs to decide how to deal with that independent product innovation, brand innovation before they move it into the core business. But again, that's the same decision that those enterprise teams have to make with product. Is it part of who we really want to be? Is it strategic? Is it going to live within our existing business units? Organizations should be making those decisions only after the internal startup has achieved a certain point. If you make those decisions too soon, then you not only likely will kill the startup, but you could actually adversely affect your existing core assets, one of which is your core brand.
Yeah, I agree with what both of you guys have said. It's an integrative and dynamic process. It's ever evolving and changing, and you can't put the cart before the horse. You've got to make sure you've got your fundamentals right. You've got to know that your offering is a desirable offering, that there's demand for it, that you're building something that people actually want to buy, and that you're testing all along the way. Brand doesn't mean anything at that point. You've got to get your fundamentals right first, and then you start thinking about brand and that sort of the on the hierarchy of the higher evolution of things. Brand is above the fundamentals of just creating something that people actually want to buy.
Hey, Roz, are you seeing any lab brands? It's something that Aaron and I talk about quite a bit, is that as these larger organizations have some amount of concern around innovation happening and all these lean startup principles where you're running experiments and those sort of things, the brand people do have a reasonable fear that existing brands could be hurt by all of these experiments or by launching products that are in test mode. And so we often advocate that large organizations, and I don't care if you're tech or not, that they should be operating a labs brand so that anybody that's experiencing new product offerings inside of the labs brand, they sort of already know that they're in experiment mode. So I'm kind of curious whether you've run across that at all.
I haven't. I think it's a wonderful idea because you're absolutely right. It can be threatening, especially for the people who are in charge of who think they own the brand, right? And it's their responsibility. It can be very threatening for them. So I think it's a great idea, and quite honestly, I just haven't seen it in my work.
Cool. Hopefully soon.
I hope so.
We'll
We'll talk
know
more.
we'll know we're doing things well when you start running across them more often. Cool. Well, we are right at about the top of the hour. So first off, I want to thank the three of you for joining us today. It's been really valuable. Hopefully, other folks found little nuggets in there that they can apply in their work right away. If you did find something valuable, please leave us a comment about what you found valuable, so we can dive into more of these types of topics in the future. And lastly, I'd like for each of you to quickly let folks know where they can connect with you if they'd like to learn more about your work.
Sure. I guess we'll start with me again since I'm on your left or right. I don't remember. So Twitter at Brant
left.
Cooper, Facebook Brant Cooper, LinkedIn Brant Cooper. So if you don't get it by now, I'm pretty easy to find. Jeremiah and I are launching a new book. You can go to leanbrandbook.com to pre-order and to check out what we've got going on there. And thanks for everybody participating.
Jeremiah?
Sure. Oh yeah, I'm second. Sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Thought you would have had it by now.
sorry. If you're McDonald's or Coin or any of the companies that I might have offended today, you can reach me at Brant Cooper on Twitter, Brant Cooper Facebook, Brant Cooper LinkedIn. If I didn't offend you, at Jeremiah Gardner on Twitter, jeremiahgardner.com. Please send me an email. I'd love to talk to you. And as Brant mentioned, leanbrandbook.com. The book comes out in October. We're really excited about it, and I think it's a very valuable thing to have on your, not on your bookshelf, on your desk, open reading.
And you can find me at Ros Mancinelli on Twitter, or Roslyn Mancinelli on LinkedIn, or innoventureconsulting.com is the website.
Beautiful. Thank you all for spending your time with us this morning, and
Thank you.
we'll talk to you again soon.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Aaron. Thanks, guys.